Hi, my name is Emma Dawson-Glass, and I'm going to be talking about a meta-analytic study I did with Dr. Anna Hargreaves, looking at the relationship between plant geographic distributions and pollination. Understanding plant geographic distributions is important to ecology because plants can structure global patterns of biodiversity. And there have been many studies which have shown that there can be a myriad of different factors that affect distributions. But many of these studies only look at specific systems, and because of this, we aren't very clear on the general importance of certain factors. And one area we're particularly unclear on is the role of species mutualisms in impacting plant ranges. One of the most important mutualisms for plants is pollination. Through pollen limitation causing reduced seed production, pollination has been found to limit distributions in a few systems, like in the orchids described in this paw and bun study. While there's some debate over the role of resource limitation in these studies, pollen limitation has still been found to be a fairly widespread occurrence. Plants could be more pollen limited at range edges. For example, in the paw and bond paper, the orchid's specialized pollinator had a lower visitation rate at the range edge, making the population less able to sexually reproduce there. But again, the generality of this relationship is still unclear. So for our study, we essentially set up virtual transect experiments where we looked at different studies from throughout a plant's range to ask the question, is pollen limitation stronger at plant range edges? To get information on pollen limitation, we used a subset of data from a global pollen limitation database, which gave us an effect size for each pollen limitation study. And then we combined this with ranges generated from cleaned and thinned GBIF occurrence data. What we would expect to see with this data is a negative relationship, where the pollen limitation effect size from the global database is greater near to the edge, and here distance is measured as a proportion that takes into account range size. So while that's what we'd expect to see, that's not what we've seen. What we're finding is that there's a high amount of variation in this data, but even when we account for things like a possible nonlinearity or the latitude of the study point, we still don't see a significant relationship. And so our preliminary results indicate that there does not appear to be evidence that pollen limitation is broadly important in dictating plant ranges. So this might underscore the trickiness in measuring pollen limitation and disentangling those effects from resource limitation. A good example of this is the glacier lily, which is a species that requires up to 7 years to accumulate the resources necessary to flower. In the case of the glacier lily, one could measure for pollen limitation when it's flowering and likely get results implying that this plant is pollen limited. But this doesn't account for the fact that resource limitation is also likely confounding the plant's ability to do things like produce seeds. So, these results underscore that pollen limitation might not be the whole picture in answering these questions. Thank you.